try it without a microphone if that's all right. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be at a different meetup. I actually haven't been to this one previously, so this is the first time here. It's a good introduction to actually get up and be able to speak about something I'm quite interested in these days. I won't go through too much about me, but I want to ask you guys, who's working with more than 10 people on the same project, product, whatever? Yeah? Awesome. Okay, so I think you'll find this directly relevant. We're going to look at a bunch of challenges, problems that are commonly experienced when you're working with more than like one Agile team, and looking at some solutions out of the playbook of what we call large-scale Scrum. Even if you're not working with multiple teams, I find that large-scale Scrum actually really draws out some of the really important things to be focused on, and really helps you to understand what good Agile, good Scrum particularly looks like. So you might start to see some of the sort of patterns and some of the sort of thinking behind Scrum actually just in terms of large-scale Scrum, but it's really Scrum also at one team level as well. So session outline, I've actually de-scoped a tiny bit. I do want to try to come close to the 45 minutes and then have a bit of a chat. But I would like to tell you a story to start with, and then jump into a few perhaps anti-patterns, a few challenges that hopefully most of us have seen. I think you'll find these resonate with a lot of us anyway. Yeah, we can see some of them are in more depth than others. Okay, so we can see how far we want to go with some of them. Some of them I'll just touch on perhaps and point you to further information perhaps. So, to start with, I want to take you back to an experience I had in London, England. This dates back to 2007, 2008. And we had a client, let's just say, a multinational was having some interesting experiences trying to implement an order management system. And in their most recent attempt at this, they actually engaged a consultancy to come in and do the requirement specification, this being a rather upfront requirement, waterfall, I guess, style way of doing things. And months later, this consultancy came back with the requirement spec, several hundred pages, and they had their senior business analysts go through this requirement spec, and one after one they would say, well, no, that workflow isn't appropriate for this business. No, that's not going to work for our people. No, no, no. And what I was told was they actually binned that entire requirement spec. Do you want to guess at how much that was worth for them? In terms of numbers, it gives you a bit of idea of the scale.
How long?
Several months, I think it was.
$1 billion.
Yeah, it was quite a substantial tome, I think, this thing. It's actually worth £20 million. Okay. So they that turns out to not be the only part of their attempt at this. I have a case study that never got released, sadly, but it actually says that they spent approximately £100 million on failed attempts to deliver this system. Okay. So this was for 43 countries that they operate in, and a lot of these countries had separate systems that acquired different companies over time, and they were looking to centralise their order management system and have a series of workflows that they could have globally and have variants for different geographies. So you can imagine it's a big business process re-engineering challenge. And one of the things about that is it can be, perhaps what you call a wicked problem space. The problem is not a straightforward one. In fact, we may not even really understand all the nuances of the problem until we've found part of the solution. And their sort of attempt at doing that with a waterfall process had failed. So yeah, the senior project managers got together and had a bit of a heart-to-heart and sort of said, well, okay, we've tried and we've failed. Let's try something different now. And that's when they started to look at this Agile thing and Scrum, and gave the consultancy I worked for a call and said, hey, you guys know a bit about Scrum, can you come and help us to use Scrum to deliver this thing? So you've got a few comments on the technology there, but really this just gives you a bit of a summary of what sort of thing we ended up doing. Had about 80 people working on it when I got involved, in 120, 160 people. So we're ramping up a new Scrum team every month, I guess. It ended up being 5 different vendors, a couple in India, a couple in Russia, and yeah, a lot of the alignment was around saying, okay, if you want to engage with us, then this is how we're working. We're using this Agile approach, the Scrum approach, and this is what we expect of you, I guess, to engage. And that often meant flying people across to London to actually be present face-to-face for some of these big room planning sessions and the like. This is just a very high-level model of the sort of structure we had. So we had an overall program or product backlog, which was for the entire thing, and then split out into different areas, or what would be called requirement areas in LeSS. And these were areas which were cohesive in the business architecture, I guess you could say. So in this system was actually pre-order, so all the workflows leading up to an order being placed, and order being a very significant thing in the whole business process. And then there was post-order, which was the area 2 here. Area 3 was actually data, so there's a big data warehousing element to this, bringing in, cleansing data, aggregating data, getting data into the shape that it could be interrogated for years to come, I guess. So yeah, we had multiple teams working in these different streams, and it was very much classic Scrum scaling patterns. So we had the teams being feature teams, able to go end-to-end with things. There was perhaps the dependency on having a data structure that they could work with that had been created in consultation with the data group, and that's stream 3. Single sprint, all in the same cadence. Single sprint review, which is an interesting one because we had stakeholders fly in from another country for sprint reviews. So this was a month-long sprint, and I remember having a stakeholder from the US fly in and be there asking questions face-to-face with everyone present. That was about 100 people in a huge room, I guess, all in that sprint review. We had, simultaneous backlog refinement all on the same day. We had big room sprint planning. So again, everyone in one huge space at St Catherine Dock in London, and we had the sort of 3 streams or areas laid out in different areas of the room, and we had all the backlog items printed out of this version 1, the system we used for the backlog, printed out, stuck on the wall, and teams would pull the stories that they were going to work on for the sprint, and any dependencies that could be identified at planning time were resolved by just walking across the room to the other team that might be working on it and seeing how we could coordinate that. A lot of common things here, and part of the point of me saying this is that these patterns have been around for a long time, and these things have been around, as Baz and Craig's work will talk to for about 10 years now in the Agile community, I guess, a lot of these sort of patterns, and it was really exciting to sort of see it really work, right, and actually successfully deliver. So what ended up happening, we had 9 months or 9 sprints of build-out of the platform, or the common system, and then every month from then on was releasing, and we'd roll out to a different country or countries every month after that. So there's country-specific configurations to do each month. And we got the cycle time. So from a high urgency, high priority ticket coming in, item coming into a sprint, through that sprint and staged up and released, if it so chose to release it, down to 7 weeks. And so 4 weeks of that was the sprint. And there's just a 3-week lag to live after the sprint, basically, to get that out the door. There was a perfection goal of integrating user acceptance testing, UAT, into the sprint. We didn't actually achieve that. There were other organisational challenges to fully getting there, but at least it was within that 3-week window and very close to the sprint. Cool. So just a quick story. That's what got me interested in this scaling sort of stuff and sort of seeing Scrum being used at sort of multi-team level. Anyway, a question for you guys. What makes scaling up difficult? What are some of the challenges? Let's call out one or two things.
Each team has their own priorities, but some of them have to go live at the same time.
Right. So that's dependency situation, coordination to be done. Yeah. That's something we're going to talk about directly this evening.
We might have enterprise challenges in adoption of people not wanting to buy into it. Not everybody will naturally buy into the experience, right, and not have been through that journey yet, right? So
yeah, so alignment about a consistent way of working. Some people are not, to the same place that other groups in the organisation are. Yeah.
Got different priorities amongst your product owners.
Right.
Teams.
Right, and there's a need to actually have things come together across those different teams or product owners. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, because you're releasing a product, you've got different alignments, then it's difficult to have a cohesive view of what you want to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And that's another interesting big theme in Scrum and really in large-scale Scrum is to have a concept of a single product and optimizing the whole, really. And it's often it will tend to look at a product being a higher level concern. So if you've got a large program of work, it may be that program, if it is to achieve some significant business outcomes and quite a substantial piece of value, that's something that may be framed as the product, essentially. And there may be a whole lot of components that all have to work together to actually achieve that value. But in terms of a value optimization and what we're considering to make trade-offs to room break success, it might be across that whole. So yeah, in terms of how some of the guys behind Les kind of phrase it, particularly Craig Larman, I believe, he calls these organisational design flaws. Now, I have to say that and stress that this is in respect to looking at the organisation from the lens of Agile and Lean and Scrum, right? Which is one of the big things that you can't get away from is that this is often a new thing for a lot of organisations. When those organisations were designed, when the structures were put in place, the policies were put in place, the different roles, the different workflows and how we operate as an organisation, were the people involved in doing that really looking at Agile, really looking at Lean principles, all these sorts of things? Well, no, because a lot of that wasn't even around or popularised at that point in time, I guess. So we're looking at it from a completely different angle now and seeing that this doesn't look the way we perhaps might like it to look from that perspective. But yeah, functional groups, big batches, sequential processes, weak feedback loops, lots of handoffs, very classic patterns, I guess, I think, in most organisations. And as we've scaled up, we've often added more roles to actually do coordination between different parties, which will tend to be what looks like intermediaries. And I guess if you want high bandwidth communication and understanding and you want actually things to be decided quickly between different parties, it can often be better to disintermediate, not intermediate. Okay, so that's I think one of the fascinating sort of principles that that really questions a lot of the ways organisations are set up with so many roles and so many different people coordinating in between them. Just one thing is a lot of this is based on, as I mentioned, like 10 plus years of real world experience. Baz and Craig, creators of LeSS, started really by conducting experiments. And you can see that in their first two books. A lot of it is try this, this is an experiment. And sometimes they say, sometimes works, but not always. And other times they say we've consistently worked in different organisations in different contexts. But I think that really goes to the heart of what Agile is about, really to base it on real world experiments and validate a lot of these things by trying it for real. And it was also very principles based. And I won't go through all the principles tonight, but there's a lot of lean principles and a lot of interesting kind of things this is based on. A lot of this work, LeSS was based on experiences in telecoms, large telecom companies. Not Nokia Mobile, where some of the safe stuff came out of, but Nokia Siemens networks, which can make some of the devices you see on the rooftops around Sydney and some of the mobile switches and things. It's interesting how many banks are doing this sort of scaling approach, I think, these days as well. And just in summary, what Baz and Craig found is whilst they provided all these experiments in their first couple of books, it wasn't very concrete. There was it was good for more advanced practitioners and people who could convert some of these principles into practices, but a lot of people were like, well, how do I do that? What does this principle mean in terms of something tangible I can actually go and do? So that's when they came to actually formulating it as a framework, and this is the book that I think is slated for September that will articulate this in more depth. But there's a great website too in the meantime, LeSS.works if you haven't checked it out. Cool. All right, so that's a tiny bit of context and a story. I just want to quickly mention just a tiny bit about systems thinking, really 101 sort of stuff. If you wanted to go from Sydney to Newcastle, right, a certain sort of system might be handy. A train? A lot of people say train. I used to do that trip by train, but maybe a car would be another option. Yeah. However, if you wanted to go from Sydney to Auckland, not so much, that system. Not a train either, I guess, right? So there's limitations to the performance characteristics of a system, you might say, yeah? So you might have to actually change the system in order to realise significantly different performance characteristics. Another way of putting it that I find quite interesting is your organisation is perfectly optimised to produce the results it's currently producing. Yeah? So if you want different results, and part of that might be in terms of some aspect of agility, we may need to think about the changes to the system needed to produce those different results. So yeah, that's just a starting point. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about with Agile adoption is capability building. And certainly where I come from with the Scrum Master role is really debugging the organisation and trying to find ways to kind of change it into something that's got those different performance characteristics we're looking for. Cool. All right. I've already mentioned this. There's a whole lot of principles behind LeSS. I'm not going to go through them tonight, but just to say that these things weren't really probably on the minds of people designing our organisations 10, 20 plus years ago when that was happening. So, first of all, water, scrum, fall. Has anyone heard of this? Yeah. What are some other synonyms or terms for this? Scrum or fall. Yeah. Scrum, but yeah. Sort of apply perhaps a little bit more broadly to use the scrum or not scrum. Fragile, yeah. Yeah, actually the first talk on Scrum I went to, well, not just on Scrum, but at a small talk conference, it was, are you Agile or are you fragile? That's a pretty good title. Yeah, water, Scrum, Agile, all sorts of things. Anyways, as we know, our organisations have been optimising around something along these lines, I guess, for years, hasn't it? And so when this Agile thing comes along, it's often looked at it at the team level, I guess, initially. And we might set up these Scrum teams, Agile teams, and say, go for your life in these short 2-week sprints. But the interesting thing is that actually just one piece of a bigger picture? Is it the fact that we've actually had a whole lot of upstream things go on that are actually in a much bigger batch, in a much longer cycle time, and perhaps a more predictive planning-based approach and governance approach? And we also have some downstream things that go on that turn out to be somewhat large in batch size and perhaps involving people in operations who may not have a high trust relationship with people in development, and a few of these sort of heavyweight sign-off processes and processes like that. So yeah, this is just one way I tried to illustrate this, and this could be interchanged, this language, for a number of different sort of single function groups, I guess. But just the idea that there might be a project scope or a framing of things, especially if we're in a project or program sort of model world that is fairly big picture, and then commitments made around some of these things, and often explicitly made explicit, I guess, through a specification that might be on that sort of big picture scale, I guess, isn't it? Like a big batch. We want to understand the scope across this whole program or project or whatever we're trying to commit to, at least do some sort of big batch sort of planning. And then we try to break that down into something that Agile teams can do. So it gets broken down into these small backlog items and stories, And whilst this might happen quite rapidly, it's really not getting right out to end users and realizing value at this point. It's really sitting as a current product internally that has yet to go through these downstream processes to realize any value. Does this sound familiar? Who's had a bit of experience of it like this? Yeah. So, yeah, this is where we've got some level of cross-functionality here, but then separate, more functional groups in that whole value stream. And we've got the handoffs between those groups and those handoffs in a big batch sort of way. And so it might be quite late that this actually gets to the point of users, and that may actually, I was originally going to put a frown rather than a smile there basically, and it might turn out that they get a surprise when they finally see what comes out the other end. I guess what we're really trying to do with Scrum, and this is a real organisational implication, is to say, well, let's think about who's involved and all the activities involved in the value stream from concept to cache, and how can we actually structure our teams to get those people, or at least those skills, as much as possible into the same team, to be able to tightly work together and to be able to go end to end with things over a very short period of time. And that may look something along the lines of drawing these people into a cross-functional team, and hopefully a feature team, which is something I'll clarify shortly. So yeah, this is where I find a lot of the early Scrum adoptions are not there yet, right? We might have our coders, testers in the same team, but there's UX or architecture or business analysis or other things downstream, perhaps like system testing, performance testing, a whole lot of other activities which are not actually working even the same way, let alone on the same team. So yeah, that's, I guess, not unique to LeSS, right? And quite a few of these things aren't unique to LeSS, this sort of strategy, but it is really core to what LeSS and other similar scaling models, I guess, emphasize. Cool. I'll just move it on. So the next thing I want to talk about is not just the flow of value and actually that faster feedback loop, but something called the contract game. And yeah, this is, I find, a really fascinating theme, because I think the vast majority of Agile going on in Australia and most places really is actually being played within the context of a contract game, somewhat along these lines. See if this makes sense to you. So our business, there's people in our business who may have business opportunities, may have business plans, business commitments they're trying to make with external parties. So there's a certain demand coming in that they're trying to service. And to service that demand, they're reliant on people in development to actually do some systems development or product development to actually produce something that meets their needs. So there's an external contract, and that might be unavoidable, or it may not even be a formal contract, but it might be a market opportunity and something we want to do. The interesting piece comes when the business internally creates an internal contract between the business and the IT group or the development group. They're looking to actually fulfill their needs. And it's a game. If you think of it in terms of games theory, I don't know if any of you are into that. It's got a start and an end to it. It's got a couple of different parties of significance we might talk to, and there's some dynamics that go on. So there's often a process by which a formulation of the scope or the requirements, perhaps at a high level, is drawn up. And there might be a process by which we seek commitment, the business seeks commitment from an IT group to that scope, and perhaps a date along with that. And just as a general thing, anytime that sort of dynamic is happening and it's being asked to make a commitment to really anything, I guess, where the responsibility is likely to shift to the other party, is some form of contractual relationship we're setting up there. Does that make sense? So the interesting thing happens when the responsibility shifts from perhaps the business who has quite a lot of control perhaps over the requirement specification or getting the scope together, and sort of says, all right, now we've signed up IT or this development group to that contract, that internal date and scope contract, we say, let's shift the responsibility to that IT group to do the delivery. And so, not to put a too fine a line on it, but it's really like it's a case of someone else's problem now, okay? And what goes along with that is what's interesting to me, I think, is that then there's a lower amount of visibility on what happens next. The development group turns these business requirements into a series of activities quite often that are more technical and got a lot of dependencies between them, and the business group doesn't have the controls to perhaps make well-informed trade-off decisions between what's going on within that development process. And yeah, it can be that there's been pressure, right? Has anyone experienced that, where the business wants, more, thank you. We're negotiating that contract, and development says, not too much, thanks very much, or you remember these are estimates, these are not absolute guarantees, right? We have that whole estimation sort of challenge that is often part of this whole dynamic. And as this process goes on, especially if it's a big batch and it's a long drawn-out thing, there might be even more pressure to add more scope, right? Because there's new business requirements, things have changed, we want to add more. And it might be down the track that the IT group figures out that it's not that easy. And here's how the conversation might go, just as this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but as a developer, it might say, yeah, it's a big mess, right? It's not looking good. I don't know how this is going to come together. Talk to their first-level manager. First-level manager talks to the second-level manager and says, things are kind of rough, but we're managing the problems. We've got some risks, but we're kind of dealing with them. Second-level manager goes up to the program manager and says, things are basically on track. We're doing some minor risk management. Have you ever seen this sort of thing? So there's a sort of opacity going on here. People are actually, representing things in a way that they feel it's going to be more palatable for the person higher up the hierarchy. And by the time it gets to business stakeholders, everything's going really well. And Scott Adams had a great deal bit on this. I don't know if you've seen it. I've often shown it in my courses, actually. Okay, now, we want something completely different from this in an Agile world. We actually don't want opacity and hiding things and faking things and pretending it's 80% complete when actually the remaining 20% takes 80% of the remaining effort. We actually want to be transparent and be open and honest about the real situation. And what can happen when you do have that sort of opaque environment, I guess, is we have this attempt to kind of keep the schedule and keep to that predictive thing that makes the business feel comfortable and keep our traffic lights looking green and these sorts of things. So we're managing the risks. We won't need to change it to amber or red quite yet. And this is really not quite what the Agile Manifesto sort of suggests, isn't it? Not just following a plan, but responding to not just change in the market, but actually change in our understanding, our information about where the challenges are and really what we're up for in terms of getting this out as a successful outcome. So the traditional sort of contract game, I guess, incentivises the sort of staying on plan sort of approach, which is often creating a false, this is an interesting thing to think about, a sense of predictability that may not be true to the reality of the situation. And the more we believe that nice predictive plan about what's going to happen, I've seen these plans. I was talking to someone today about having things pre-allocated to sprints way in advance. Basically, we know these 6 stories are going to be done in sprint 17, sort of thing. The more we kind of believe that, the more we're kind of almost self-deceiving. It's almost like believing your own myths and starting to have like a lack of transparency just as a result of that. There's some interesting stuff Craig Larman talks about in terms of systemic variability in product development. You can look at all sorts of interesting things about the disparity in productivity between software developers. I think even Steve Jobs said it's like 1 to 25 kind of thing in his experience, and I've seen things which are much bigger than that, right? some of the research done some years back suggests much bigger variation. So yeah, there's a whole lot of things we won't even be able to see till we go there. And that's the nature of a truly complex environment where we've got unknown unknowns. We don't even know some of the stuff we don't know yet. So yeah, this is what happens, I guess, more pressure, especially the business saying we need more because we're kind of having pressure to add more scope. Things have changed, change request. IT says less. We're under time pressure as it is. We can't take on much more. And one of the ways of thinking is, when there's a surprise, right, the whole dynamic turns out, well, you committed. You said you would deliver that by that date, right? We were going to hold you to it, that whole sort of dynamic. And I think the way Craig Rahman talks about it, it's this contracts negotiation is almost maximising the opportunity to shift the blame when things go wrong, essentially. Both parties have tried to maximise, businesses try to maximise the amount of scope they get for their, get in that thing. IT is trying to push back and say, no, we're going to need to sort of put some contingency in here and get less, right? Both parties have been pushing against each other to come up with that arrangement. So yeah, have you ever seen it sort of break down into this sort of situation? Your fault kind of thing. And the thing that can happen that I think I've seen over and over, tends to drop on the floor. Quality, right? This is an insidious sort of thing, right? And the sort of thing that I think a lot of developers causal loop diagram sort of way of looking at things. So this is part of a systems thinking kind of thing. Just to point out that there's delays in cause and effect, which often make things less obvious what's going on, basically. And there can be quick fixes involved and things like that, which look like, to start with, that they're helping on doing what we're trying to do, but over the longer term are actually working out against us. So I guess this also reminds me of some things. Has anyone seen Rob Thompson's work? Rob Thompson, he published a book called Extreme Project Management. And he talks about the ages going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s with software development of IT experts having the power because there was expert people that were wizards and who knew what they did in their dark rooms kind of thing. So had power over the users. There's some tokenism where clients got a little bit of tokenistic sort of control back, but then there's the payback where it's a business project and the business decides and we all dictate the way this agreement's signed up and these sorts of things. But wouldn't it be nice if it was more balanced relationship? That we had a more shared interests and shared risk and more a partnership style relationship rather than trying to exploit the other party. Which is exactly what it turns out that the Agile manifesto was on about, and what Alistair Coburn was sort of highlighting with the subtitle of his book on Agile, I guess, the cooperative game, as opposed to a competitive game. So in a competitive game, it's a win-lose game. In a cooperative game, we're seeking a win-win. And it's a really different dynamic, I guess. And it's a pretty fundamental change in sort of relationship, I think, in organisations to try to get to that. And that's really getting at a deeper understanding of what this line in the Agile Manifesto, I think, is about. And I took this to being, when I first looked at it, sort of more external contracts or contracts with third parties that are more formalised. But really, you can see that this contractual sort of relationship goes on inside organisations. We're all part of the one organisation, we all hopefully want a good outcome out of it, yet we're both trying to exploit the other party to maximise to our advantage, basically, which is the win-lose. So with Good Scrum, believe it or not, you can set up things to play a different sort of game, okay? And I've had this experience when the product owner has been the person who's had the external demand problem, had the commercial problem, basically, and hasn't had to sign up some intermediary in a contractual sort of way to say, let's kind of lock you into a certain expectation because I've got the problem and you've got the control. The actual control is placed in the hands of the person who has the problem. Does that make sense? And that's a really powerful thing. And that's the intent with the product owner role, if you believe the large-scale Scrum approach to it. So, yeah, perhaps instead of having separate functional groups and having a contract set up to sign up these people to a certain sort of scope and time, and then management, and this is going just to the coordination that might need to happen between different functional groups to make that happen, and working with sort of business stakeholders having sort of less control if they just get these reports. Yeah, I guess what we're trying to move to is saying, all right, let's get the person with the primary demand problem and the commercial problem to actually take the steering wheel and have the ability to make well-informed trade-off decisions to maximise the return on investment and to get to as successful an outcome as we can. Does that make sense?
Basic Scrum.
Yeah, it is. It's just done right? And this is, that you'd be amazed at how many organisations I've walked into that haven't understood this, and they're quite a long way from actually getting to the level of empowerment necessary to have the actual person who's directly got the commercial problem, and this is often profitability, like profit and loss. Have product owners who've actually have been the person responsible and accountable for profit and loss be the product owner, and that's just really powerful, right? In terms of they don't need to, try to satisfy these other sort of things being lobbed in. It's you've got the steering wheel. Cool.
How often does that happen, that you have that kind of person with the right amount of time to help you
Yeah, well, that's the
getting the
interesting
outcomes
thing.
you're looking for, because they
Time.
yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things from Leicester might surprise some of us is that the product owner works with up to 8 teams. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the trick to that is to say the product ownership is not about all the heavy lifting of clarifying the backlog items, of breaking them down, of doing lots of manipulation of stories. It's actually about making the commercial decisions across the whole set of options, which is much more, just at the end of the day, just ordering a list. Now, there's a lot of conversations, a lot of thinking, a lot of work to go on to come up with a good ordering of that list and make decisions based on all the feedback and all that sort of stuff, but it's not about all that heavy lifting of the work, which then gets delegated to the team to clarify the stories and to people who've got good understanding of the domain, subject matter experts, etc.
Would you say it's true? So you often see the opposite of that, where business analysts in particular become like proxy product owners?
Yeah, that's something that we see quite a lot, I think, in organisations which have got a strong, business analysis kind of competency area, and they want to know how do we kind of fit into it. There was a talk last week about that, wasn't there? Yeah.
So there are a couple of things here. So as Craig Lerman says, the subject matter expert is not the subject matter expert anymore if he is the product owner, because he is not in the market anymore. If he is in the market, he's then not the subject matter expert. So he's saying prioritizing the requirement is the job of the product owner, but explaining the requirements into further detail is the job of a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
Second thing about the business analyst, because we need to have cross-functional and people with T-shaped skills in even a single team Scrum. So if there are people who can do a little bit of business analysis or business analysts who can do other jobs like testing or other stuff, so probably the need to have pure business analysts in a team was not there in single team Scrum, is not there in large scale Scrum. So that these two concepts combined kind of answer this need of yes, if a powerful person has to be the product owner, his time is not going to be as available. Subject matter experts can help with it. And yes, business analysts are important, but they don't have to be the traditional business analysts. They can be cross-functional, T-shaped skills business analysts.
Yeah, and have a different sort of workflow too, where it's not just about coming up with a spec that's handed off, but actually about creating understanding within the minds, really, of the actual people doing the work, and actually validating, that what we're doing actually meets the business need and solving the problem and things too.
That boils down though to having the PO unicorn, right? I mean, like the examples of this. Only thing I think of Patrick Outridge at Telstra, like this, you need C-level buy-in, and you need a PO at that level who the reality is, let's be bluntly honest, a lot of the senior managers that we deal with don't really understand what the teams under them do. In that context, the product owner, they have to be T-shaped skills to both manage and understand at a top level those feature components, or it won't work because they can't prioritize. And that's the big challenge for large-scale Scrum. I've done big Agile implementations. You've got good core skills in the Agile teams, but the problem is that guy, the further you take it up the chain, the less he's likely to understand the components lower down.
Yeah, I think.
The least information about what's going on.
Yeah, of course. And often he's got the least drive because the reason he's got there is because he's a professional manager. He's not actually a domain expert. He's not actually interested in that. He's a professional manager. And that's the further you go, the more you get into that.
Yeah, and it'd be lovely to find more people who have got the entrepreneurial kind of mindset, I guess, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's why it works in startup, right? So
Yeah, why can't it work for large organisations if people actually kind of thought that way, were kind of encouraged to actually drive opportunities that way, isn't it? Cool. Anyway, I want to flick through a few other things quickly, if that's okay. I think this one's pretty obvious to most of you if you've got experience with Agile and Scrum. It's a lot about increasing transparency, getting away from that opacity by keeping progress and keeping understanding where we're up to in terms the business understands, right? Chunks of value, things in the language of the business, and doing projections down backlogs and showing how things are going across with the current product, even like just reporting what's in the current product, what's in the pipeline, what are our projections moving forward and things like that. So I think can be quite powerful, and a lot of us, I think, have only touched on the surface of what we can do to really make that nice and visible to people. And to me, if you don't make that visible, it just adds to the likelihood that a more or less agile aligned status reporting and governance model is going to be felt to be needed. Basically, we can't find a way to actually make it much more visible in the way that's naturally aligned to being able to make change and be able to sort of see the impact of that over time and scope and things. Then we're kind of people are going to insist on something else. Dependency hell. I thought I'd put the word hell in here just to a bit tongue-in-cheek. I think this is something a lot of us have probably seen. This is probably a little bit cheeky, but you've probably seen stuff like this, right? Where we're mapping, I guess, the components or the elements that have to come together to actually deliver a chunk of value or an end-user feature. And this is symptomatic of really what we see as component teams in a LeSS environment, that you actually reliant on multiple different teams or different groups to actually do different component work that all needs to be integrated and come together to deliver that story or that chunk of value. And the challenge with that is when you have teams who are specialising in one particular component, whether it's the mobile front end or it's search or it's the CMS or what have you, and they have the ownership of that and all changes to that component need to funnel through that team, it becomes a dependency management problem at planning time. So we have to figure out which teams we need to farm out certain item to actually get it done. So that, imagine this sort of item needs to be done by component A and component C to actually be delivered. Moving to feature teams, the idea is the feature team can actually make changes to more than one component and has the ability to go and directly do what they need to do to deliver that feature or chunk of value. So they become not dependent on these other teams to do the work, but can actually do that work directly. And what that means is it's a much, much clearer line of sight and a more one-to-one between a feature or story, and the team that does that end to end, and it actually takes away then the really need to sort of shuffle the work out into different queues to different teams, and then worry about the problem if component team B creates an interface that doesn't work with component team A's interface, then has to kind of get reworked in the future sprint and draw out the whole cycle time, etc. So yeah, I find that pretty powerful. And what's going on when you move to feature teams is we're starting to move the dependency problem from planning time into integration time. So what that means is we're going to find out if Team Wee and Team Shu actually have a clash when they're both changing component B in a way that's not compatible really quickly when that's checked in and built and the build server says no thank you. And that triggers a get-together between those teams that we can resolve in a small batch way and fairly quickly. I think that's really leveraging the power of this continuous integration at a broader scale.
There are some constraints there, with, especially in large organizations, around the architecture that you have. If I look at our own situation, I completely subscribe to that. You want to get as little few as component team as you can, but there is a limit to that, to a constraint. When I look at the complexity of our world, with document fulfillment and business intelligence and pricing engines and what have you, it's simply not possible to create a small team of 8 people that have all those skills.
No, and interestingly, unless it's not necessary for a single team to know every component in a big ecosystem of systems. But yeah, that's one of the challenges.
And if you take things like the large mainframes, we get rid of most of it. But like if you look at the financial transactions of a large system in an insurance or bank or something like that, it's a pretty specialized skill. Again, and you don't need it for every single story or feature. You only need it every now and then. So that when you only need it every now and then, it doesn't make sense to create those skills in your team. So you have to look at architectural things. How can you make it more self-service or whatever? It's not always possible to do that. And then we find that large-scale projects just have complex dependencies. It's a fact of life. And the way to deal with that is to, over time, simplify your architecture and go more to a service-oriented world.
Okay.
That takes many
another
years.
strategy I'd like to just talk to as well. And I think some of these things, I think they're more natural in a product-centric organisation where it's not a project that has a kind of known end point and maybe relatively short term, but we're actually looking to gear up the organisation for years of product development to come. So imagine you have product backlog items requiring these skills, like skills A, B, C for this item, and skills D, E, F for that item, and you have teams, feature teams, who have these core competencies with their skill set. So for ABC, it's obvious. Team A with ABC skills would tend to say, you beauty, we can do that one with all of our skills. And really, the principle there is when we can leverage specialisation, deep specialisation, we exploit it and say, you beauty, let's do that. But when specialisation becomes a constraint, the interesting thing to think about is, can we break that constraint? Even if it means going slower, even if it means actually having to upskill or learn some new things. Now, some things will be much more difficult to learn in longer term than others, perhaps, but what you're looking for is to find a good enough fit, and it could be that either one of these teams has the same sort of fit. They fit 2 out of the 3 skills, and whichever team pulls it in, they know that they're going to have to learn a little bit about that other skill, perhaps to deliver this one. Part of the principle here is that it's better to do a really high value thing slower than to do a low value thing as fast as possible, potentially. Especially if you believe in those sort of values and trade-offs. And another thing is that it's actually in the longer term a valuable thing for the organisation to actually broaden the skill set of the teams and actually create a more T-shaped skill set, even if it means some teams have got, not deep specialisation, but they can do some of the more basic work when it comes to skill D, let's say. So does that make sense? This is a strategy thing, isn't it? Like, it's not something you say, you beauty one sprint will suddenly upskill a whole heap of teams, but it's a thing we can work at over a period of time.
I've experienced exactly this kind of problem, and it sort of shifts the problem up the organisation in terms of actually how you're going to move resources around and how you're going to fund that training. So I wonder whether LeSS actually has any organisational design advice for that kind of thing.
Yeah, so cross-cutting competency building patterns. So what we're talking about is communities of practice style things, and of course with the guilds and all that sort of thing we might talk about with Spotify language. But this is really emphasised in LeSS to find ways to actually work on those skills across teams, right? And not just for people brand new to it, but people who want to keep current with the latest and greatest that other people have come up with.
So I'm going back to 2 slides ago because you said moving from planning to integration, and that one really resonated with me because prior to Agile, I did everything in a planning perspective where I would look at all of the dependencies over a year and then break that down in a quarter, and I had a matrix that looked very much like what you just showed. And now we've moved to Agile, and now the expectation is that we do it in integration. But my nightmare is that means we do it on Tuesday, because I've got 6 teams that all want to check in code on Tuesday for our release on Wednesday. So our integration ends up being, and we're doing features, like each team is working on features, but we only have so many platforms. So we're all checking code into the same place, and we're testing all of it on Tuesday for release on Wednesday. So we're saying we have all these teams who work on their own, but the reality is we're all checking into the same place, and nobody's going to do it, like anytime until the day before that the sprint's due. It's only 2 weeks.
Yeah, so
sprint.
if we're doing one integration during a sprint, let's say, and it's an interesting question as to what's the constraint that makes us kind of do only one integration per sprint and not do it continuously every day, every time a small bit is checked in. And so sometimes provisioning of platforms, right, the availability of environments to go to do this stuff, especially with systems, multiple systems involved. I remember the CTO at this consultancy I worked at in London, when he walked into a client, he would basically come out with this incredible matrix, like just servers upon servers upon servers. They're all mostly virtual servers, right? But he would say, we're going to need heaps and heaps of environments, basically, so that the environments never become a bottleneck for our people doing this work, basically.
Yeah, right now all my constraints are environmental. We've changed the process, but we haven't changed the environment.
Yeah, I've seen that in quite a few organisations as well, yeah.
Isn't that one of the core constraints of Agile, that it is based on everyone doing test-driven development, and we've all got continuous integration going on, and that's why there's so much obsession about test coverage. It is utopian in that, and reality is when you've got multiple systems and everyone is checking in code, and it gets incredibly difficult. I mean,
so it sort of comes down to that systems thinking approach. When we do a lot of stuff, it's like, we built the car, but we've forgotten to build the road and the service stations and the maintenance depots and all the infrastructure that you need to run a car.
For us, it's incredibly easy. If we weren't integrating every hour, then it'd be hard. Like it's hard for us not to integrate.
so if you've got continuous integration in place.
Yeah, it's easy.
You're very lucky. Most organisations don't have this lady clearly doesn't have continuous integration in place. So
Because
it's
CI
unfunctional.
is a big investment, it's then selling the benefit of that
It'd be
to
hard
the
for us not
business.
to make
No, I know that. If you're in a small company or you're in a startup that's got that set up, and you've got gone from the beginning. But if you're Westpac trying to do continuous integration across the entire.
Well, we're a bank with a legacy platform that runs a lot of credit unions around Australia, right? And we have a massive legacy platform, and we've done it.
Fantastic.
Let's take the time. Feel free to chat about that
Sorry,
further, but I just thought maybe just wrap up with a couple of quick things. The slide deck's actually already online if you want to have a look at it, just on SlideShare. I'll post it on the meetup group. There's a couple of other topics. They were really around cross-team sorts of things, like cross-team learning, and some of the things in LeSS really go to. One of the really interesting ones is actually big room backlog refinement, where it's actually socialising the problems coming in, business problems, and actually creating shared understanding about what these backlog items are, so that when we do the sprint planning part 1, which is when the teams decide which teams take what, there's actually a knowledge across more than what the team that's taking it has, and they can better sort of understand what dependencies they have with other teams in before they get to that sprint planning, basically. I think that's great for understanding, like creating domain knowledge outside of the one team. This is a thing I've been talking to Brogan about, that I've been using a science fair style diverge converge format for the scaling up sprint reviews, where it might be going around different terminals or different demos that we can have very informal chats out and ask questions and really have all the kind of very high bandwidth parallel kind of conversations we want to have, and then bring people into a room to say, okay, how's it shaping up basically? What are your key sort of observations and feedback about the product going forward? Other quick thing was just the architectural and design alignment. So a lot of the patterns go back to, okay, we need alignment, therefore we need a centralized person or persons to actually make the decisions. I won't go through that slide so much as to say that one of the things that Les really espouses is actually having rich communication across teams and really stimulating different ways to not just understand the design before the fact, but also regularly kind of coming together to actually draw models of what we actually have just been doing in the last few months and socialise that and do that in an interactive way on big whiteboards and things like that. So it's a conversation and it's a high interaction type thing rather than someone drawing up a big Visio document. So yeah, this sort of thing. Cool. And yeah, I think the final thing is really the Scrum Master role at large, right? Taking it to the organisation and debugging a lot of the lack of understanding of how this works, the organisational impediments, not just the team impediments, not just the product owner enablement, but some of these technical practices like the continuous integration, understanding first of all what's the drivers for that, what's the kind of cost versus payoff perhaps we might start to talk about, and really working at that consistently. Cool. So as you might know, there is a little bit of a community starting in Australia around this LeSS stuff. Spent time with a few interesting guys doing 3 days of training on LeSS. And yeah, one thing I find exciting about it is it's really this sort of model where it scales from 2 teams up to really how many teams you can think of. There's a thing going on at one of the telco companies where it's 2,500 people on the one product. And this sort of adoption takes years, right, to actually really get through that entire group of people to the level that we might be talking about. But it's a roadmap, and there's things like perfection goals and a vision for where we want to take it that play out over that time. Another quick thing is it's perhaps trying to seek the sweet spot in terms of low prescriptiveness versus high. If you think of a very loose set of principles like learning organisations or some in Agile Manifesto is kind of a bit more to this sort of end of the scale versus rational unified process is something at the other end. What you find is if you overly kind of specify or prescribe things, it constrains people's process innovation or ideas about how they can improve. It often leads to bloat because people say, well, we've got these 120 things, we're not sure whether we need this particular role or this particular artifact, we better just have it just in case. Yeah? So you end up with more stuff than you need and you don't really ever sort of question or try it without that sort of thing is what we often find. So I was trying to sort of find that sort of sweet spot where it is a balance between those 2 extremes. Just 2 diagrams, I won't go through them right now, but this should look pretty familiar with from the standard Scrum, and this is just the LeSS Framework 1, I guess, going up to 8 teams. And there's a reason why there's 8 teams, but it really goes to how many refined backlog items that feel is reasonable for a product owner to be actually handling. And this is less huge, where it's taken out to multiple areas. Okay, so the same thing, split out into areas where there's some cohesion in that area and perhaps minimal, trying to find lines of least dependency between those areas. Cool, so it's more about those sort of feature areas than about components or system structure. And yeah, it's a whole lot about LeSS at LeSS.works, and yeah, I find it quite fascinating. 2 books, 2 400-page tomes or so, if you want to kind of look at all the principles there. And the LeSS side actually has a lot of more specific stuff about the framework and yeah, a lot of very concrete sorts of things. Cool. I wanted to get through, I guess, tonight, so thank you.
Do you want to say 2 or 3 final questions?
Yeah, something other than continuous integration. Bad thing, yeah.
Well, you've got another challenge.
Is less kind of enough to get that organisational alignment? Because from what I've sort of seen, less kind of looks just like more Scrum.
Yeah.
And it's really easy for an organisation to shoehorn the whole of less into IT delivery. And then you basically get water less, which I'm going to nickname wrong. So getting that organisational alignment is the hard part. And actually, getting the intent of less is to go right across the organisation. The actual experience of less or safe or any of these tends to be IT delivery and a product owner.
Yeah, no, you hit on something pretty major there where it gets put in a box,
Yeah.
I guess, from the outset. A bit like Scrum being contained within something else, because we don't believe that Scrum or the set of concerns can actually deal with all the concerns that we have, I guess, isn't it? Yeah, there's an interesting thing floating around about containing Scrum, a bit like, someone containing a fire, basically. It's but what I think I'll put the slide up actually. There's a whole lot of things less is not, but I think one of the things I appreciate just from my small talk background, I guess, is that very simple things can be powerful and actually can have reach and implications a lot beyond what you might first imagine for that simple minimalist sort of thing. And really what we're saying in kind of this lean sort of way of thinking about things is, let's streamline. Let's find ways to actually minimise the amount of unnecessary overhead and complexity that's not intrinsic to the nature of the problem, basically. Which is what I find quite interesting about Scrum when you look at it more deeply, is that it actually simplifies a whole bunch of things by saying, well, we don't need all these parameters as variables. We'll lock a few things in and keep those things stable. There might be things like the time box, there might be things like stable team, a few of these sorts of things, so that we can better see and better manage those other concerns that are variable, that are worth actually managing, like the value and how effective we are in delivering. But yeah, to answer your question, I think I've spoken to Baz about this basically, and he really works at doing a lot of groundwork in terms of understanding the principles and the thinking behind these things, and that's often needing to go to senior people in the product organisation or program organisation, I guess, to sort of say, this is a model that actually means less overheads if we actually choose to go there.
It's getting that sell right at that level into the business is the really hard thing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time we sell faster, better, cheaper, but faster, better, cheaper is really hard when we don't have the infrastructure behind us. And to get the infrastructure behind us, you need to invest a lot of money, so it's suddenly not cheaper anymore. So that's a really bad sell for the business, because it's really hard to get there.
Yeah, that's why I think this is perhaps a kind of longer kind of sell kind of process, rather than saying, here's a pattern, teams change, but the rest of the program doesn't change, or the organisation doesn't need to change around it. We're actually saying this is a longer game of actually reforming the overall organisational design to be simplified, to be streamlined, to actually move some of those coordination roles back into value creation roles, or things which can actually have a higher leverage than people coordinating between different groups. Yeah, so I think it's a sell along the lines of, do you want to be a lean organisation? I would tend to start to talk to that. Yeah.
Just quickly, I think it's not necessarily to be able to do the agile scales, just agile full stop.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Suncorp, we started not at scale, we started small, and then it grows and grows and grows. And as you learn and get more confidence, you apply to bigger projects. And the same story about continuous integration, we didn't used to have that. It was all stuff, yeah. So you can do agile without it. But as you continue on your journey and you try more challenging projects and things, push the boundaries all the time, you hit different constraints and issues in your organization and your process that you have to address. Yeah. But the thing is, you don't have to address them all in one go, in 1 week. You know, it's a journey, and you can start addressing them, and they'll become. We've been through the same thing about provisioning of systems and platforms and everything, business buy-in. You go through these things, yeah, as you roll agile out in your organization. But I would not try agile at scale on your first agile project. Yeah, that would be very scary.
Yeah, I used to say, before you go to scale, get it working in the small first.
That's right.
Actually get one team working professionally before you try to replicate that.
But just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? To scale of Agile across the enterprise. Not every project is going to lend itself well to Agile, especially with the Scrum. I'm not saying where I've worked, it's worked some I guess projects work well on the waterfall. If they've got a good change management process and they're not susceptible to a lot of change going through, they actually lend themselves okay to waterfall and they can still work well.
Yeah, that's probably a longer conversation, but I do really like to get people engaged. But one thing I engage people with is some of the lean simulations. Right? And with this sort of banking organisation where you had the head of banking, senior management and things in there, and basically got out the coins and started timing things and actually took it from the big batch waterfall model and gradually broke down the batch size and looked at how it flows and looked at value accrual and in terms of benefits, starting to be realised early and often. And the net result, I guess we start to work it out in dollar figures, is it falls much sooner into the profitability much sooner if you look at from a value creation perspective. And the net result, 2 years later, 5 years later, you've actually got more money accrued, more return on investment if you actually start to.
Yeah, I'm a massive advocate of Scrum, to be honest with you, but I'm just hearing around that like a lot of the bigger banks are struggling to adopt it, and they're all a bit afraid of it actually.
You can probably put it on the head, it's not actually the project or problem that doesn't lend itself to it, so people who are actually driving it don't lend themselves to doing it because they don't want to change, they just want everyone else to change, and because they don't change, they're actually training other people to change or actually make them efficient, and that just frustrates everyone to a degree.
If you take it right out, it's like the motivations and the drivers in the organisational system. Are we actually wanting, do we look at things in terms of a cost, efficiency, optimization, or do we look at it actually as a value driving, approach? And they're very different things, completely different mindsets, and I think that's the big challenge is really to flip it from that cost-centric, efficiency-centric thing. Because I keep on hearing that, like we need to make this thing efficient. Right, and it's actually a local optimization. They're just trying to get these few people to actually more efficiently hand things between each other, which is not at the same rate as everything else in the value stream. So that's actually having a net nothing benefit to the overall delivery of value. So if you measure the value rather than the cost side of the equation, you measure the value as well, you'll tend to make different decisions along the way. So, I think that's the big sell to organisations, to sort of raise their kind of thinking of the value and the payoffs and what can also the risk management too, because one of the banks I worked with, for the senior head of banking, the sponsor, he was very much of the mind that if we were going to spend 3 years in requirements analysis and 2-3 years in coding and using testing, right? And 5 years into this big program, the stakeholders have seen nothing come out of it that they can realise any value back on. How's that in terms of risk? How's that in terms of stakeholder satisfaction, right? Whereas what they're doing is actually releasing every 3 to 4 months, right? A whole new increment of the banking system, taking one customer, getting it working for them, moving on to the next one, taking a line of business, getting it working for that line, bang, bang, bang. And you're learning a lot along the way, and obviously accruing the value early in the program and reducing the risk down because they're taking on some of the juicier things early and having diminishing returns sort of thing over the program.